Anyway, I think we can start, be kind of prompt. So welcome again to everybody to the second of our series of webinars for Saxonburg. Today, this is season 1 that we are going through at this stage, and we have 5 episodes happening every Thursday afternoon. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will be muting everybody while the presentation is going on. Please post your questions in the chat, and then we will go through as many of them as we can during the presentation. However, if we don't get back to you immediately, then we will email you during the day tomorrow and just answer whatever questions there were that we didn't get to. We're also going to be posting the details of how to purchase any of our Saxonburg wines at the beginning and the end of the chat, just for your information. There, I see Chantal has done it, so if anybody would like to place any orders. And then let's start. So welcome back, Dirk. And to finding out what you're actually currently doing in the cellar. None of us know. It's even a surprise to us. So firstly, where are you?
Okay, so I'm at the top of our red wine tanks. So this is right at the top of our winery. Behind me is basically where we receive our grapes. So that's where they get put into. Then below these tanks, we've got a crusher and destemmer. And then from there, they're pumped into these tanks. I don't know if you can see it on the video, but they're open top. So the tops are actually open. We can fit about 5 to 6 tons of grapes in there. So these are all our red wine fermenters. So this is actually our red wine fermentation cellar. And we've got 23 of these tanks. So it's crazy to think when lockdown started, all of these were still basically filled with grapes. Now they're just filled with wine. So the really nice thing about it is they've actually got floating dome lids. You'll see there's a lid lying to my left there. So we can actually settle that onto the wine, and there's a little tube that you pump up on the side, so that makes it keeps oxygen out, and then we use them now for storage before we go into barrel.
And what does it mean? Sorry, I know I'm only supposed to ask you questions afterwards, but what does it mean to have the open top tanks? What does that do? What does that mean?
Well, the nice thing about the there are a few benefits of open top tanks. The big one is it gives you flexibility in terms of what kind of extraction you would like to do. So generally, I mean, red wine ferments on skins, obviously, because all the tannin, all the color is in the skins. So there's different types of extraction. The one is punch down, where you physically take a tool and you punch through the cap of skins, because as it ferments, the skins rise to the top and you need to get them submerged to get the extraction. One is physically punching it down. So that is the older way of doing it. And then there's another way, which is called a pump over, where you literally take wine from the bottom of the tank, pump it, and spray it over the top of the tank. And that's how you then wet the skins at the top. So each of these have different types of extraction. So obviously punching down is more a manual, mechanical action on the skins as well. So you get a bit more extraction that way, whereas pump over is generally tends to be a slightly softer extraction. So this really gives me the flexibility, and I can decide, and looking at the skin, at the grapes, decide which type of extraction I would like, and really play around with that. Another thing, because they're open, alcohol tends to evaporate during fermentation as well. So fermenting in these, we actually have a lower alcohol conversion. So you actually have lower alcohol in the wine than what your potential alcohol is according to the sugar. So that's just another benefit. Yeah.
Okay, so I know that there have been a few people who have helped you with the punch downs and have realized how strenuous those physical punching through the cap is, or how physically strenuous it is. So yeah. So while the rest of us are kind of facing the real challenge of keeping our hopes up and our wine cellars full, a new vintage is being created by you, and it's such exciting times. I know that I feel like I'm missing out, but tell us more about what is happening at the moment.
Yeah, so like I said last time, we were quite lucky when lockdown started that we were at least finished harvesting. but we still had a lot of tanks with skins on, so I have to press those. So for the first 2 weeks of lockdown, I actually moved in on the farm, and I had two of my great assistants in the winery to help me, and we finished pressing. So basically, for the first 2 weeks into lockdown, we just pressed. So that's basically you drain the wine out of, it's after fermentation, so it's not wine and not juice anymore. You drain the wine out, and then you manually dig the tank out. So because these tanks are, you can't see it on the video now, but they're hanging in the air basically. So the press, we can move around below them. So we move the press to under the tank, and then you physically get into the tank and you dig it out. So it's a good exercise. So we did that for the first 2 weeks. At a max, when we're really pressing a lot, we can press about 6 tanks a day, but that's a lot of work.
Yeah, how many hours a day is that working? Because that's extra hours, isn't it? This year?
A little bit, yeah. Because the thing is, you can press it. So every press cycle on whites, on reds it's pretty quick because it's finished fermenting. So on reds, the press cycle is around about an hour and a half, whereas on whites it usually takes almost 3 hours to complete a press cycle. So you can do, we've got 2 presses, which helps, but there's the cleaning up afterwards, and that's the thing I think about winemaking that people don't always realize, is the amount of cleaning that goes into making wine is actually quite ridiculous. It's very important to keep everything clean and sterile.
Of course.
Yeah, so that was the first 2 weeks, and then the last 2 weeks we've now started racking tanks. So then obviously after they're pressed, you've got a lot of sediment and there's a lot of solid particles in the wine in suspension that settles out after a week or so. I like to rack the clear wine then off of those particles. If you leave it on the gross sleeves of the red gross sleeves too long, it can become a little bit reductive because they're quite heavy. They settle down quite a lot in the tank, and it becomes a very reductive environment at the bottom of the tank. So we rack them off when we just after pressing, about a week after pressing, and so that was what we did. And now this week I actually sent in a lot of samples to Vinland testing for malolactic fermentation, and we actually finished our malolactic fermentation on about 90% of the red wine. So I'm very glad. It always sometimes can take a few months, and this year we're quite lucky. So they went through smoothly. So this week a lot of it was sulfuring wines up. So then it's tasting, deciding if it needs a bit more air, if it needs another racking, and then sulfuring the wine up and basically putting it to bed. And then after this, next week, I'll start looking at our 2019 reds that are currently in barrel, start with those blends, because we obviously need to take them out of barrel so we can put the 2020s into barrel.
So it's basically a never-ending story for you, all the different jobs and things that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, a day in the life of a winemaker, I think that most people think that that's just a lot of drinking of wine. I think that's what people think is my job as well, just tasting wine all the time. But like, you know, what is your day like been today? Yeah, well, okay, so today now our routine has slightly changed since the start of COVID-19. So we've split our team up. So half the team is here for 2 weeks, and then the other 2 weeks, and it's basically just to make sure that we can social distance in the winery, and that we always have a team in reserve for if one of us falls ill, and we can quarantine. There is someone else to look after the winery. But so the first thing now when we get into the winery in the mornings, it's basically chatting, seeing if everyone is still healthy. No one's got a fever. No one has anyone sick at home. Washing our hands. So that's now the first thing, which is quite new. And then after that, it's basically going through the work for the day. So generally, I like to prepare my work orders or the work for the day before. So last night, I went through all the analysis that I got back from Vinland, everything that needed to be salted up, and all of that. So went through that, wrote out all those work orders. So this morning, we went through all of everything that needed to happen in the winery. Then I'm busy doing stock take at the moment as well. So we're getting to the end of April, beginning of May. So then it's stock take, all labeled, unlabeled goods. We have to do the stock take of all the 2020s now because everything is produced.
So it's looking at all the volumes, taking dips on the tanks, getting proper volumes on that, going through the barrel cellar again, making sure that we've got the right amount of barrels, all of that. So that takes up quite a chunk of your time. Then, because fortunately, we can start exporting again. We have a whole lot of export orders coming in and that we need to prep. So then it's getting export stickers. Some of them need special export stickers. So printing stickers, looking at the stock for that, ordering new labels, seeing if we've got enough boxes, seeing all of that. So there's a lot of stock control, dry goods control as well. And yeah, between that, it pulls up a day quite quickly. But what I must say, what I really enjoy about this is I never do the same things 2 days in a row. There's always something changing. Oh, and I forgot, very importantly, I tasted some wines as well. I had to taste some wines today. So I went through, I basically decided on the 2020 Sauvignon Blanc, but I'm just double checking to make sure that I'm 100% satisfied with the wine that we have.
Yeah, because you don't have the team there tasting with you, so giving our input. So the pressure's all on you right now.
Exactly.
Anyway, so we actually already.
I'm trying to change my personality on a daily basis at the winery, just so I look at it from different angles.
Yeah. Good luck with that. So we have a couple of questions already. So Clint would like to know: do different methods of punching down and pumping over work better or worse on different grape varieties?
Yes. But once again, there are no set rules on this, and every winemaker, as many winemakers as there are, will have their own opinion probably. Generally, thicker skinned varieties can handle punching down quite well. So Pinotage, Cabernet Sauvignon handle it quite well. Syrah is versatile, so Syrah can do well with both. And then something like Pinot Noir that is very thin skinned, you would tend not to punch down too much because the skins just break up too much if you punch it down, and you generally want that softer extraction on something like that.
So that would mean that the wine would have a deeper, darker color. There would be a little bit more tannin. So the punching down is a little bit more of I don't want to say aggressive, but a little bit more, than the pumping over. Okay.
I mean, the pumping over, generally, you get a bit of movement of the skins, but it's generally the wine just flows through the cap of skins, where punching, you're physically breaking that cap. So there's a lot more mechanical action on punching down. My extraction, what I decide to do is not just based on the varieties. It's also what I see in the vineyard. It will change from year to year. And for instance, on this year, I did a lot of punch downs, combination of punch downs and pump overs on the ones that I picked relatively early. And when I got to after the heat waves we had, and they came in at higher ballings, the skins tend to be a bit softer, and the more alcohol you have, the more soluble your skin, the skins become. So then I tend to step back with the punch downs and just do pump overs. So it's really, it's seeing what you have and reacting to that.
Yes, and there's no sort of, as you say, set formula of what you do. Every year, every vintage, this is what you do. No, it's what you get given.
Exactly.
And then a second question, which is from Louis, is what percentage of our wine gets exported? And what are the key export countries? Is the exports mainly in bottles or bulk? So I can answer maybe the first two of those, but yes. The percentage of our wine that gets exported is between 50 and 60%. What are our key export countries? Well, our focus has been on the European countries in the past. However, we are opening up some great the Eastern Japan, China, Vietnam has just opened up recently, which is quite exciting for us. And then the Americas as well. So that's also quite we're newly entering it again, or entering it for a second time. So, and then are the exports mainly in bottles or bulk? Well, we export bottled wines only, not bulk. So I hope that answers the question. I don't know if you want to add anything, Dirk?
No, that's perfect. Thanks, Gary.
Okay, so then my next question for you is really all about what is your winemaking philosophy and what can we expect going forward with the Saxonburg vintage. This 2020 vintage seems to be such an exciting one, not only because of it being your first vintage at Saxonburg and us all being at home and you're working, but what else can we kind of expect going forward? But most importantly, what is your winemaking philosophy?
Okay. Well, I'm gonna probably sound like a lot of winemakers nowadays. It's really, I think the key is to let your terroir or your site and your farm shine through. Which is for us, if you source grapes from different areas, it's always more difficult to build a certain identity because you have all these different identities that you're putting together. We only make wine from grapes from Saxonburg. So there's a golden thread that runs through. There's almost a style that runs through all our varieties. So for me, it's really to reflect that. That's the starting point, is to reflect what I see in the vineyard. And it's just an interpretation of what is happening in the vineyard is what we try and do in the winery. So it's doing as little as possible, but as much as is needed. I mean, we try, and everyone has read minimalistic winemaking, and all that is fantastic. But you have to remember that at the end of the day, you have to be in control of the process at every step of the way. So we don't do unnecessary. We don't want to find unnecessary or add unnecessary things. I try and add as little as possible, but still ensure that we produce the best quality wine that we can. So it's a relatively hands-off approach, but as soon as I say hands-off, it's not doing work. It's actually a lot more monitoring. Because as soon as you're hands-off, you have to know exactly what's going on because you need to know when to intervene. So that's a big principle. And then another thing I think that is that I focus on quite a lot is, I think as a winemaker, I can't necessarily change the aromatics of the grapes so much because that is what we get from the vineyards. So the grapes they have certain aromatics depending on where they are planted and the site and the aspect and all of that. But what I work on is mouthfeel. Mouthfeel for me is mouthfeel and balance. It's for me two of the most crucial things in any wine, in any great wine. And that you can manage with on the reds with the extraction, the type of extraction you do, how long you leave it on the skins, all of that you can manage mouthfeel and structure. On the white, that goes using barrels or using older barrels, lees contact, batonnage, all of that. So that's really, for me, is I tend to look past the aromatics almost. Not saying it's not important, but if you're a proper winemaker and you look after your wine, your aromatics will be there. But I really focus on the mouthfeel, the texture, and the balance of the wine. So that's that in a nutshell. I mean, I can talk about my philosophy about wine and winemaking for ages. I don't think anyone has enough wine left at home for that conversation. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yes, that's a good point. We have to limit these conversations by how much wine people still have in their cellars. And looking at behind what you've got behind you, you've got plenty. So, okay.
Yeah, well, to give you an idea, I've got more than 300,000 liters of 2020 in the winery. So that's without the 2019s.
It's okay, of just this current vintage. So sorry, 300,000 liters.
More than 300,000 liters, yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. That's impressive. I mean, I think what people are seeing behind you there is not all of the vintage either. Obviously, there. Just to put it into perspective for other people, there's another whole room next door to where Dirk is sitting, which is filled with all the white wine tanks, as far as I know. Right.
We've got two barrel cellars. We've got 2 barrel cellars. So.
And 2 barrel cellars. So there's you're just seeing a small portion of really what's going on at Saxonburg at the moment. So a couple of more questions. what is your favorite cultivar to work with, and why? And I think you did touch on that last week when we were in the vineyards, but maybe in the cellar, what, does that change a little bit, or give us some insight?
Okay, so firstly, I think picking between cultivars is almost like picking between your kids. You never really want to do. You never really want to say who your favorite. You might know which one your favorite is, but you don't actually want to
And
admit it to
spend
anyone.
just that little bit of extra time on them.
Yes. So, but I mean, for me, having recently moved to Saxonburg, it's quite a good match because Saxonburg is very, very focused. Like I said last time, more than a third of our plantings are Syrah or Shiraz, and Shiraz is definitely one of my favorites, if not my favorite. I think it's probably my favorite red to work with by far, just because it is so versatile. It's very adaptable to different terroirs, and you can pick it at various levels. For instance, I love Cabernet. I love good Cabernet, but it's a little more finicky, and it's a bit more temperamental almost. Whereas I think Syrah really is versatile, and you can express yourself quite a bit more with Syrah. You can with Cab,
Yeah.
if you pick it too early, it's green. If you pick it too ripe, it's jam. But with Syrah, you can pick it early and you can have lovely spice and pepper. If you pick it right, you've got beautiful full-bodied fruit in there and darker fruit aromas, and so you've really got a lot of flexibility with Syrah that I love. On whites, probably between Chenin and Chardonnay, I guess. I mean, I love Sauvignon and all of that as well, and Sauvignon is very fun to make as well, but Chenin and Chardonnay is probably my first love on the whites.
Okay, great. So, then the next one. Okay, so Clint has also asked about the terroir. So, Clint, we covered a lot of that in our webinar last week. So we'll probably send you an email about that, or alternatively, you can watch last week's webinar on our YouTube channel. And then Louis wants to know, do we use our own grapes only, or do we also blend from other wine farms?
No, so it's 100% Saxonburg grapes. So that's really good because I have 100% control over. We've got a viticulturist or farm manager that's been here for 12 years, so he knows the vineyards in and out. And we have a direct link, and so I have 100% control over management of each block, and managing, like I said last week, it's very important to manage the block for the end goal. And now and every year that's going to become almost easier for me because I get to know the vineyards that much better. But it's 100% Saxonburg fruit.
Yeah, and I have just a comment to make as well on this, and I never knew this until I was part of the wine, really submersed in the wine industry. We are basically well known for our single cultivar varieties or single cultivar wines that we produce. We have only one blend that we make, which is our Guinea Fowl Red blend. However, you speak about our Syrah being picked early, being picked late, and then putting the components together. I think what a lot of people don't understand is that even though we're a single varietal kind of farm, there's a lot of blending that goes into the wines and the end product of those wines. So you'll take a little batch of Shiraz that was picked early, a little bit that was picked a little bit riper, a little bit that is just go through that a little bit, because also it's fascinating for me, or it was during harvest when you were saying the alcohol levels are lower this year. Maybe also just touch on that, because you were saying you'd pick a little bit later because you needed to get the alcohols up a bit, etc.
Yeah, so and that's probably something that I left out when I spoke about my philosophy. So it's crucial for me is when you look at, and I think a lot of people, like you said, don't always understand this. They think you make a wine as is and that you take that directly to a bottle. So that's not the case at all. So for me in harvest, it's really, I'm not looking to create any final wines. I'm looking to create building blocks. So I want to have certain components to put, and these components fit like a puzzle piece, and that creates the end wine. Just you can make fantastic wines. Just you can have beautiful single vineyard wines, but they're always just going to be that. Whereas if you use different components and you use different methods of fermentation and different vessels to ferment in or to age and mature in, that really gives you all of these different components. So I on everything, we have something that we generally pick a little bit earlier, and not earlier as in underripe, but at a lower level.
Yes.
This year on the Shiraz, on the Syrah, we did 100%. We did 200% whole bunch fermentations, which we just put the grapes in, stomp them, let them ferment, just 2 gentle pump overs, and that's it. So that's a completely different style to the normal crush and destem. And then, so these all build these components. On the whites, I have tanks that we picked, that we have sites that gives us more greener flavor, more minerality, more acidity, and then we have slightly warmer sites that gives us more tropical flavor, a bit more richness. And then I match yeast. The yeasts I use for these are different as well, to bring out, to enhance those components, because I then use the one for the richness, one is for the more lean minerality, one is for this flavor, and then when you blend, you have all these components, and then you start building it up from there, and it's like you put this puzzle together, and it's quite amazing when it all comes together, because they really, each wine then brings something to the final wine.
And that's the art of winemaking, and that's when that's the little what's the word that I'm thinking of now? Sorry, the magic comes from those building blocks. And getting
and that's really up to your interpretation, because it is there are so many variables that you can make, and we want to produce a certain volume of wine, obviously, but we're not stuck on that. So we always, going point is always to produce the best quality that we can, and then the volume is almost second to that. So, but that gives me the scope of where I can make 200 different Syrahs in a year, and I can make 100 different Sauvignon Blancs in a year. So it's quite daunting when you sit with all of these components and you're trying to figure out, how am I going to put together, or which components to use, and which will benefit the style and which won't benefit the style. But that's also that's part of that's one of the things that I love the most is putting that together, and it's building this puzzle.
Because although every year the wines are different, because it depends what we get given by the weather gods, etc. There has to be a certain sense of consistency with the quality and the sort of the magic of Saxonburg has to come through on each and every vintage. So
definitely. And I think it's quite interesting on that point as well. Generally, on cheaper wines, people expect them to be the same year to year. And as soon as you get into more premium wines, people tend to understand vintage differentiation. But you need to have that. There's that, like I said, what's really nice about sourcing only from our own vineyards. There's already that golden thread that runs through everything we do, and that keeps going through from vintage to vintage as well. But you want to, so you always work. When I blend the 2020s, I will always taste 1 or 2 vintages, prior vintages as well, and just see, okay, what is last year's wine showing like now? Because will remember, okay, this is what it showed like in the barrel. Am I happy with the development throughout the year where it is now? And then you generally want to stay within a certain style, but not be restricted by that style. If you get what I'm saying, it's like you want to stay within that, but that's not going to limit you from making the best wine you can. There is, fortunately, at the price points that we sell our wines, people tend to understand that there is vintage difference between vintages, and you don't have to copy each vintage.
No, exactly. And I mean, actually, if you technology also changes from year to year, I guess, or there's improvements that you can always make. So just a couple of extra questions. Rousseau has asked, How do we decide which wines will have barrel contact and in what quantities? Wow, that's a very vast question, and we were going to actually cover that possibly in the next week or two. But I don't know if you want to maybe just touch on it.
I can just briefly go into it. So generally, now that everything, so we've done a few tastings. Vincent is the lucky one. He is on the farm, so at least I have someone to share the wines with. So we've done a few tastings of 2020s, and we've basically tasted through all of the 2020s, and I've made notes as I go along. So I've got an idea already of which are my stronger components, and which components I feel will do well with newer oak, which components will do well with older oak. But the final decision will be made once everything is sorted up. They've had a few weeks to settle, and they've cleared up a little bit. Then I'll taste through. I'll put all the Shirazes that we have. I'll put them next to each other. I'll taste through them and then decide. Obviously, your stronger components tend to get a little bit more better oak or newer oak, but you also don't want to. But that's very much on how you interpret it there. And some components you feel the wine is maybe a little bit too delicate, and you can't put any new oak on it because you will completely dominate the wine. So then you tend to go for more third or fourth, fifth full barrels even. And then the stronger, the more robust, the wines with bigger tannin structure tend to handle newer oak better. So then we'll go more new oak on that.
So it's again component by component.
Yes.
Yeah, takes lots of time. And then another question is, and I think we also again touched on this last week, but maybe you can talk about it again, is what are you open to planting foreign grapes that can adapt to South African soils and blending them with your existing grapes?
So at the moment we don't have any niche cultivars or niche varieties, but that is definitely something like I touched on last week as well. Like you said, we're going to have a vineyard planning meeting somewhere in the near future, probably somewhere in May, we'll have like a 3-year, a 5-year, a 10-year, and a 20-year plan of what we want to plant and where we see the farm, and which sites we think will work best with which varieties, and that will definitely be a discussion in there. You have to, I mean, there are a few things to deciding on which vineyard or what variety you want to plant. The first is you need to plant. I think the starting point is always planting the best suited variety to that specific site on your farm.
Yeah.
But then you also have to realize that we have to have a market to sell that into. So you still need to. There's no point in making the best wine if it sits in your warehouse and no one buys it. So there's always that also comes into play. So I can't say yes, we're definitely going to do it, but it is something that we'll definitely look into, and with climate change and all of that, that is definitely a discussion one needs to have, is to plant the right varieties that will survive through climate change.
Yeah. And does the cellar work with gravity? And what is the benefit of that, like a gravity flow?
So no, not generally. So these tanks are obviously gravity flow to the press, but the rest of the winery is not gravity flow. Gravity flow is great because it tends to be quite soft on your wine. You don't have to hook it up to a pump. You just put it on put a pipe in, and then it flows, which can be great. But I don't think it's necessarily that much better. We tend to move wine very little, as little as possible. So, for instance, all the whites were straight from press into tank, and they haven't moved out of that tank. We've just pulled popped the tank up, made sure it's safe, and that's it. I haven't moved any of that. So you try and limit the amount of times you almost touch a wine. With reds, I'm not too gravity flow. I don't think is that much of a benefit, because reds generally can take a bit of oxygen take up, is sometimes a good thing. For instance, now at such a young stage of the wine's development, I tend to want to give it oxygen because there's a lot of dissolved CO2 in it. So I actually pump it and splash it into the tank. So you literally put the pipe in the top of the tank and you just let it fall and foam, and you want to get rid of some of that CO2 and get a bit of oxygen in, because you need the oxygen to bind with your tannin, or for the tannin to bind up and to soften the wine out, for the fruit to come out and all of that. And gravity flow, what I've heard from people that worked in some fantastic gravity flow wineries, people tend to be sometimes a bit too lazy, and if there's that amount of stairs, you have to go up 3 flights of stairs to check the top of your tank every time. You're not always going to do it. Whereas this is, I'm always, you can get to everything much easier.
Yes, of course. So Rolene, and I think it's Rolene from Neisner, is saying that she wants some Pinot Noir, please. But again, that's a few years down the line, Rolene, I think. And then from Michael, does Saxenberg make any white blends? And what are the main white varieties used in the blend? Yes.
So in the past, we've made a Sauvignon Semillon blend. So that is something I have a little bit of Semillon in barrel, and I've got just two barrels of Sauvignon as well. It was just for interest's sake to see how it develops. So we'll look at that and decide. But it really depends on if we're happy with the quality, then we might decide to bottle it, but it's not a definite. And as far as I know, the Guinea-fowl White used to be a Chenin Viognier blend. It's now 100% Chenin Blanc. We don't actually have Viognier on the farm anymore. So our white varieties are now Sauvignon is the largest portion of it. Then Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, and a little bit of Semillon.
Okay, great. Well, I think we'll call it a wrap. There aren't too many questions coming through, but if there are, please we'll answer them after the meeting. But my final question really is a question for this time. When are we going to be able to make our own wine at home?
Not soon.
Some of us are getting a little desperate.
Well, you can. Woolworths are selling grapes, so you can. It would be very, very expensive, but you can go and buy some grapes. Your wine is not going to taste great because table grapes, the berries are way too big and there's not much flavor. If anyone, I don't know how many people listening have ever tasted wine grapes. They're much smaller. They're not so nice to look at, but there's much more flavor to them. So normal grapes you'll buy in Woolies or in shops now won't have that much flavor, but you can try. You can squeeze the juice out, and well, you can try with putting some yeast in, or do a natural ferment, keep it cool. But don't blame me if it's vinegar at the end of the day.
So it's still a long way to go before we can get to that stage. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe we should have maybe if this goes on for way too long. If it happens the next vintage, then we can have classes, homeschooling basically, for making your own wine, and we can ship the grapes to someone and they can.
We'll be oversubscribed, I'm pretty sure. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Dirk, for taking the time out of your busy day. We know that it is a never-ending story in that winery, so we really do appreciate the time that you have taken. Please follow us on our YouTube channel to see the recordings of these and other videos that we've been making during this period of time. Next time, we're going to have a very exciting Zoom meeting, because we are speaking to the family and talking about then and now. So the Bureau family have owned Saxenberg since 1989, and it'll be very exciting to get some insights from Fiona and Vincent Bureau. If you would like to purchase any of our wines, you can either email me or else direct message us on our social media platforms. And I think Chantal is going to just pop up those details again now. And we look forward to welcoming you back again next week, same time, same place, to Saxenberg, a year in the life. And cheers. And thank you very much again, Dirk.
Yes. Thank you so much for everyone listening in.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.